This is one of my most favorite things in this room. This is a Bomem DA3 Fourier transform infrared spectrometer. It's from about 1985, and we're gonna get this thing bolted up to a PDP 1173 with a high performance vector processor attached to it. We're getting into the pinnacle of 1980s computing and 1980s scientific research. Like, what a fascinating field to be diving into. And the only reason that I'm able to do this is because this machine is currently on loan from my buddy Mike down in Austin. The Bomem DA3 is one of the very best high resolution infrared spectrometers you can get your hands on even today, 40 years on after it was designed and built. And Mike has a business keeping these things going, and he understands spectroscopy and the complex science behind it better than anybody I've ever had the pleasure of talking to. So Mike, thank you so much for letting me get my hands on this, but also thank you for just walking me through everything that's involved with this field. It's absolutely fascinating. Also, Mike, I think we're gonna pay you a visit here in a little bit because there are some things that I wanna check on your Bomem that you have in your home lab. But first things first, what is a spectrometer and what is spectroscopy? Well, if you want a more in-depth explanation of what this field is, check out the first episode in the series. I go into a lot more detail, but in short, essentially what we have is we have a collection of sources up here that are generating electromagnetic radiation. And in this particular machine, we can generate from the visible to the far infrared. Right now, we just have a light bulb on that's generating the visible spectrum of the electromagnetic radiation. Now, that visible spectrum, I'm just gonna call it light from here on out because it's gonna get confusing. Electromagnetic radiation is long to write. So we generate some light, and it shoots down through here, hits a mirror, bounces off this mirror, and comes to the center and hits this magical little piece right here called a beam splitter. When it hits that, the light splits into two different directions. One passes straight through and hits a fixed mirror down here. The other one reflects up and hits a moving mirror that is in this massive black tube right here. Now, the light is gonna reflect off of both the fixed mirror and the moving mirror, come right back to the beam splitter, and it's gonna recombine, shoot through the bottom, bounce through some steering mirrors, and then ultimately hit the sample that we're wanting to test. It's gonna pass through that sample, hit another mirror, go into the detector on the front here, and what we're doing is we're detecting how much of that light is passing through the sample or being absorbed or reflected by the sample. Now, this tells us a lot of really interesting information about the sample as it is, but because we have this mirror that can move, we can do some really extra tricky stuff. If the fixed mirror and the moving mirror are equidistant from the beam splitter, then the light is gonna pass through, reflect, recombine as if though nothing happened. But as soon as the moving mirror moves, the two mirrors are no longer equidistant, which means that the light that we're sending through, which is composed of a massive number of different wavelengths, well, those wavelengths are now going to start interfering with each other in different ways. They're either going to constructively interfere, which means that their peaks align and we get a waveform out the other side, or they're going to destructively interfere, which means that their peaks misalign and they start to cancel each other out. And so we need to know exactly where the mirror is, or at least we need to know that the mirror is moving and how fast it's moving. So to do that, we have a helium neon laser that we send through the same optical path. And that helium neon laser has a very specific wavelength. So as the moving mirror moves, that helium neon laser is going to constructively interfere or destructively interfere with itself. And so we just take a measurement every time it constructively interferes. And we do this for a massive distance that moving mirror can move. And this tells us a huge amount of information based upon the energy that the detector is receiving. But we have to be able to make some sense of that information, so we have to do some really complex math called a Fourier transform that takes a finalized waveform and breaks it out into all of the different wavelengths that create that finalized shape that we're seeing. I do not know how to do a Fourier transform. It is an incredibly complex piece of math, but that's why we have the high performance vector processor bolted to our PDP 1173. One of the things that we had to do in the previous episode was we had a bad 5-volt power supply. So we pulled it out, and I didn't really want to troubleshoot it at that time, and I replaced it with this modern Meanwell switch mode power supply. Now, the original power supply was a big linear supply, so the new modern one is about a quarter of the size, but a lot of you expressed concerns that a modern switch mode power supply can inject a lot of high frequency ripple and noise into the power system. And you are absolutely right. That is something that we have to be aware of, because on a piece of very precise scientific equipment like this, sometimes you need extremely stable power that has zero ripple so that you aren't influencing the weird analog stuff that's going on within it. However, this 5-volt power supply that we replaced is solely for the 5-volt digital logic that's on the computer. It's not used for anything else. So I think we're going to be okay, but I am cognizant of the fact that there is some now high frequency noise being injected into the system, and there is a possibility that that noise could filter its way through and affect other parts. So we're definitely going to keep an eye on that. And in the future, I would like to get that original linear 5-volt supply repaired. So we're probably going to dive into that and do a dedicated episode on trying to figure out exactly what went wrong with that. But for now, I'm too excited about science, so we're just going to rock the meanwhile and keep an eye on things, and we're going to push forward with trying to get this machine up and going. Which brings us to the next point that you guys were hyper concerned about, and that is the laser. The laser is currently on. You can see it says laser stable right here. And I'm not sitting here wearing special laser safety glasses. And you guys are absolutely right. Laser safety is something that has to be considered. You only have 2 eyes, and lasers can absolutely melt them. But also, I think it's very important to understand the type of laser that it is, the power of that laser, and the environment in which that laser is being used. So let's break each one of these down. The environment in which this laser is being used is that it's in a self-contained box on the back, and so there's no way for the laser to stray out of that box in a way that would potentially strike my eyes. Not only that, the laser is passing through a very well-defined optical path with mirrors that are bolted in place. The only mirror that can move that's within the laser optical path is the mirror that can move vertically here. And that mirror is flat and can only go in one dimension. So there's no way for the mirror to shift in such a way that would cause the laser beam to shift off that optical path and strike my eyes. Furthermore, the laser is being diffused. It's not a hyper pinpoint of concentrated light. It's spreading out into about a centimeter wide beam. Now that is still somewhat dangerous, but it's not nearly as dangerous as the pinpoint of light. But also, this is a helium neon laser, and it's only 2 milliwatts. To put that into perspective, that's almost identical to this thing. This is a barcode scanner from the 1980s, and inside of it is a 1 to 2 milliwatt helium neon laser that is almost identical to the laser tube that is in this machine. And we gave these to untrained high school kids all throughout the country to scan groceries at a grocery store, and pretty much we just said, don't point it directly at your eyes and turn it on. But the point that I'm trying to get at here is that a 1 to 2 milliwatt helium neon laser is low power enough that your blink reflex can protect your eyes. So as long as I'm not being dumb, like holding my eye open and shining the laser at it, or, walking outside and staring at the sun, my eyes should be okay. But I don't want to dismiss the fact that you guys were absolutely justified in your concern about laser safety. I did not go into enough detail in the previous video about the type of laser and the power of this laser in this machine. On this board in the card cage here is a little can that looks like this. This is an analog to digital converter, and it had developed a short between the negative 15 volt rail and ground, which was causing all sorts of havoc. Now, we got inspired in the previous episode, and I sliced it open, and we could see that we were greeted with a beautiful PCB. And after peeling away the RF shield, just look at that. Full to the brim of logic and pad. Just what an absolute beautiful hunk. And it turns out that the only thing that went wrong on this was a tantalum capacitor had shorted. And we replaced that with a new capacitor, and the whole thing seems to be working all right. But well, I say it seems to be working all right. We don't actually know, because enough of my machine isn't functional to properly test this. So one thing that I want to do today is give this a test and see how it's going. And if we have ruined this by cracking it open, Mike sent me down an extra ADC in there so that we can continue on with the build. However, there is one more thing that is still very wrong with this machine, and that is the moving mirror. And I realize it's strange for me to be talking about the moving mirror, but standing here at the back of the machine, but that's because the motor control logic for the moving mirror is all right up here in this box. And the mirror is totally fine and free to move, but it's unpowered, which means we have a fault somewhere on here. Although I don't think the fault is actually in this box. All of the logic in this box is derived from a plus 15 volt rail and a minus 15 volt rail. They run through a 7912 and a 7812 to generate plus and minus 12 volt, and I can check that right here and it doesn't exist. As a matter of fact, the plus and minus 15 volt that is being sent up to this for the logic isn't there. And that's coming from the backplane down here. So we have some kind of broken connection between the backplane and up there to get the plus and minus 15 volts up there. But I think if we can get that up there, that's gonna come alive, our mirror's gonna start moving, and this machine should start doing some pretty exciting stuff. The first thing I wanted to do though was replace the rubber bands that hold the laser in place with a proper spring, but this spring that I chose is way too weak. So I dug through my box of springs and found one much stronger. After popping it in, yeah, there we go, that's much better. All right, next let's move on to trying to figure out what's up with my power delivery. Connector J40 up at the top here should have plus and minus 15 volts on it. And I am seeing positive connection here, but now I'm even more confused. There's nothing for it, I just gotta get intimate with the documentation. It's a little confusing and I have to jump back and forth between multiple pages, but here's what I managed to figure out. Connector P40 goes to the motor control box. The other end of that cable is J40. J40 is shown here on the card cage wiring diagram. If the text looks almost unreadable, don't worry, it's actually worse in person. But on J40, we can see plus 15 volts is on pin 1, plus minus 15 volt return is on pin 2, and minus 15 volts is on pin 8. And if we try to decipher the tiny text next to those pins, all three of those look like they go to J11 pins 15, 16, and 17. J11 is on the top right of this diagram and confirmed that 15, 16, and 17 go to J40, but where do they go from there? J11 on the backplane is this connector right here, and there aren't any traces that go to it, just wire wrap wires. Despite hunting all over the documentation, I can't find anything anywhere that shows where those J11 pins get the 15 volt power from. But no matter what, it has to be coming from P2 down here on the bottom. This is the only place on the backplane that power comes in. So we have some kind of broken connection between P2 down here and J11 way up here. So let's just start tracing it backwards. And I can see that the wire wrap wire that goes from the pins that I care about on J11 goes straight up to this card edge connector right here on the top left. And it goes to 3 pins that make perfect sense because those 3 pins have traces that go to them that carry the plus and minus 15 volts with the plus minus 15 volt return. However, if I check the connection to the pin, that's good. But if I check the connection to the trace, that's bad, which is very weird. And then I started looking a little closer. If you look at the right side of this card edge connector, you can see that the 3 pins that are on those traces are very affirmatively soldered in. But if you look on the left side where our wire wrap wires are connected to, the pins are not soldered to the through holes. As near as I can tell, this backplane never should have worked, but this machine came out of a working environment. So what the heck is going on here? I'm like crazy confused. All I really got to do is make a connection from those 3 pins to the 3 traces that they're supposed to be connected to, and that should repair this backplane, but like what a wild situation to end up in. I'm like 90% certain that we found a production mistake on this thing, which is kind of a cool thing. All right, well, I'm gonna try and come up with a game plan about how best to fix this, and then hopefully it'll start working again. Before I do anything, let's just confirm the pin numbers here and make sure I'm not doing something completely boneheaded. And yeah, we're on the right pins. I don't particularly like this solution, but I can't think of a better alternative. What I'm going to do is just tack a little jumper from pin to pin. This should be easily removable in the future with a little solder wick, but should also solve our production error here. It's not my prettiest work, but checking it with the multimeter, we should have our plus and minus 15 volt logic power making it to the motor control PCB up top now. All right, moment of truth. That's kind of a dire modification that we did on the back, and it's also not my prettiest work. But what we want to see is we want to see the motor come to life and the mirror start to move. What we don't want to see is everything catch on fire. So I've got a second camera set up here looking at just the movable mirror here. So hopefully, whenever this thing is in the proper idle state, that mirror should be going up and down on repeat. So let's flip the switch and see if that happens. Okay, things are turning on, making noises. The mirror is not moving. All right, let's flip some switches here, see if we can get it to do something. So we'll flip over to mode 3. The light came on, the laser came on, but our mirror is still not moving. And also we have some alignment voltages going on here that I feel like we didn't used to have before. That's interesting. All right, it's been like 4 hours since I last saw you guys. Things have gotten interesting. We're running into a lack of knowledge on my part here. But I think where we left off, just like 20 seconds ago for you guys, was we had fired it up and I was hearing a sound that I hadn't really heard before, and we're seeing an alignment voltage here that I hadn't really seen before either. So let's break that down. The sound that I was hearing was coming from the tube. If I opened this up and I held my ear to the tube, I could hear that humming sound going on. And what that sound was the motor up here holding the mirror in a set position. So good news. The motor is now powered, but how come the motor isn't causing the mirror to move up and down like it should be when we're in mode 3? Well, that has to do with the alignment voltage that we're seeing here. So on the front panel, you can see on the far left, we have a digit that tells us what mode we're in, mode 3 or 4. Then we have 3 groups of 2 digits. These are the alignment voltages for X, Y, and Z respectively. The X and Y voltages are for the fixed mirror down here to get that perfect alignment going on. And the Z voltage is for the motor to move the mirror in the tube up and down. And we can see that it was like bouncing between like 10 and 18 or whatever. So it's sending a signal to this motor to tell it to move, but the motor is not moving. So maybe that signal isn't actually making it to the motor, which brings us to a potential problem somewhere here in the computer. Now it's important to remember that when I got this machine from Mike, it was actually a parts machine. So things had been pulled out and removed and replaced and kind of shuffled around. And when I got it, the card cage looked like this. And it looks like I'm missing 3 cards, but actually this slot and this slot don't have a card edge connector in them, so you can't put anything in those anyways. So I was really only missing 1 card, which was the card in this slot. So I asked Mike what the card in slot number 2 here would be, and he said, oh, that's the Bridges card. It has to do with the vacuum system. And he was swinging by on his way to someplace else, and he dropped off a spare Bridges card. So I got this card right here. I took it, I slotted it into slot number 2 here. We snapped it in, and I went, excellent, I have a full back plane. Nothing more to worry about up here. Except today I was looking at it a little closer, and I realized that in this slot right here, it is the Bridges card. So at some point in time, the Bridges card had been moved from slot 2 to slot 4, and the card that was originally in slot 4 has disappeared. So if you want to venture a guess as to what the card in slot 4 is supposed to do, I think you'll probably be correct, because that's the card that is the speed and search control card for the motor. So the motor is powered up, but it's not receiving any signals because this card is missing. I don't have a spare one here, but Mike has a spare one down in Austin. And I want to go down to Austin anyways because I want to test that ADC that we cracked open and see if it's still good. So I'm going to pack up that ADC, pack up this spare Bridges card because I don't need 2 of these, and let's go to Austin.
So the test we're about to perform is to find out if the repair on this ADC was completely effective or if there's something else going on. So what we have set up here is a known good ADC in the spectrometer. We've got a function generator putting a sine wave in to the same spot that the signal would have been coming from the detector. So this is going straight into the ADC with a sine wave. We're going to collect an interferogram, which is just the un-Fourier transformed signal directly from the detector. And we'll compare the quality of the sine wave that's recorded on the computer with this configuration. Then we'll do it again with the repaired ADC, compare and contrast, and see what we've got. So we're using a newer version of the software, but the functionality is exactly the same. The hardware is exactly the same. We're going to be collecting an interferogram. The way I've got it set up is I'm going to be taking a single scan, so we're not going to be adding multiple scans together. I've got a fairly low resolution set, and then I will go click OK, and the system will request the data collection. It'll verify the alignment. The mirror moves up, gets all the data, and we're done. And then, so basically we've got lots of repetitions of the sine wave as the system was collecting data, and we zoom in. We've got a nice clean representation. If you look closely, you can actually see the limitation of the data points. So you can see we have a data point here, got another data point up there, another one here, another one here. If this was our infrared data, in order to accurately represent this frequency, we would need a minimum of 2 data points per period. And for this simulated 500 wave number data file, we got plenty of data points. Now we have the repaired ADC in place on a different ADC card, and we will go ahead and take a new interferogram. So this is the repaired ADC, number 21. Same thing, single scan. Okay, got it. Is still very good. The amplitude of the repaired ADC seems to be higher. And well, I just have to check all of the settings on the card.
Okay.
And see if there's something going on there. But as far as the cleanliness of the signal, it's centered around 0. It's got good shape and everything, so I think that's fine. It looks good.
All right, Mike and I were a little curious why the repaired ADC board was pumping out twice the amplitude. And so we're learning about revision differences. And so Mike was thinking that maybe R5 here, which is a feedback resistor, might be suspect. And you can see here that in the schematic it says it should be 10K ohms. And R5 is this big blue resistor here on the board that has our repaired ADC. If I check the resistance of that, you can see it's pretty much perfectly 10 kilo ohms. And so if I come over here to the new revision of the ADC board and check R5 on it, look at that, 20.4 kilo ohms. So the new feedback resistor is double the old feedback resistor, which is why we're seeing double the amount of gain. Once back home, we'll solder the cover and RF shield back on, and I bet this ADC will be as good as new. But with that, we had just one last thing to do. Grab that replacement motor control board, and then it was back onto the road, keeping my eye out for deer, but otherwise just enjoying the night drive in the Cedric. And now that we're back home, this is the circuit board that we were missing. This is the board that controls the motors on the fixed mirror as well as the motor for the movable mirror. Without this, we were completely dead in the water. And it's a very cool looking PCB. We got a nice little DAC down here and a whole lot of stuff going on. But what I was most curious about was on these 3 pins right here. And check this out. If I put the probe on the back side and a probe on the front side, we can see 0.2 ohms. That pin is directly connected across. And it just so happens that these 3 right here are all directly connected across from the backside to the front side. And that is the plus and minus 15 volt rail with the plus minus 15 volt return. So I chatted with Mike a bit about this, and this is like super fascinating because this is 100% a production mistake. I checked the other backplanes that he had at his shop and they were all soldered on the inside here, whereas this one is not, and it absolutely should be. But they were saved because the card makes the connection from the solder side to the component side. That card has that connection, which saved them from this production fault. Really cool bit of history to find here, but it means that we didn't explicitly need to make this repair here. We just needed the correct card in the slot. And so I'm going to slot the card in, and I think I might actually remove this because I don't really like having things soldered to wire wrap pins. So we'll remove that, clean it up, slot the card in, and we should be good to go. Now that we have the correct card in the card cage, I'm hoping to see the laser come on, the mirror start to move, the alignment voltages to do aligning stuff, and us to get a little light right here that says align, which would say that the whole machine is kind of up and running and ready to go and ready to start doing measurements. But you know, I'm not expecting this to go all that smoothly. Particularly our laser is a little ornery. It takes a couple of times for it to fire up, which tells us that it's getting a little gassy, and we're gonna have to replace that laser tube at some point in the future. But for today, let's just soldier on. So here we go, power coming up. Mirrors are moving. We have powered up into mode 4. The laser did come on, that's a good start. Okay, we fully powered up, but you'll notice that the main moving mirror here is not moving, but that's actually to be expected because we're currently in mode 4. When the system's in mode 4, it's just kind of like a standby system. So I need to flip this little toggle switch right here to push us over to mode 3. Now that we're in mode 3, the mirror should be moving. It is moving. That is great news. It is moving incredibly slow. All right, check this out. I switched it to scan on the front, and the motor sounds way nicer. And you can see our mirror is just gone. Oh, here it comes. It's coming back. It's coming all the way down. It's gonna hit the limit switch. It's gonna go all the way back up. Right now, it appears to be scanning from limit switch to limit switch, and I don't know if I'm telling it to do that or if that's a problem, but that is awesome. That is so cool. You can see that our XY alignment voltages here are 0, and this is our Z voltage, and that's because our mirror is going up and down currently. And so that's kind of bouncing around to what we would expect. But what we haven't seen is we haven't seen the line light come on. The laser comes out of this little port right here on the bottom, and it hits this mirror right here that sends it through the full optical path. Hits this mirror and heads back through this little port up here to a sensor. And actually, if I hold a little piece of paper here, you can see what the laser looks like. That's what the laser is supposed to look like. It is going through the port, so the laser itself is aligned, but the detector is not. This is the laser detection PCB right here, and there are 6 photosensors right here in the center. They're on the backside, and then this clergy of ICs around them. Each IC is for each sensor, and these sensors are arranged in a very, very specific pattern. But when I put this board on, I didn't have the laser turned on, so I just kind of bolted it in place roughly, and there's absolutely no way it's aligned. And here's where things get a little tricky because we need to align the laser, but we're not going to do that by moving the laser box itself around. This is right where it needs to be. We do that by moving the sensor card around. And this sensor card has 6 sensors on it, and all 6 of them need to be perfectly aligned. So when the laser comes out of the laser tube here, it is of course the tiny little pinpoint of light that you would expect out of a laser. But after that, we beam expand it, then collimate it into a about 2 to 3 centimeter or a 1-inch square. So you have this 1-inch square coming out of the bottom of the box here. It strikes this piece right here, which chops a corner of that out. So you end up with a little Tetris block of laser light. But when it chops that corner of the block out, it fills in that extra corner with white light that is generated by this little lamp up here, which comes down, reflects, and then passes through a lens and joins up with that laser right here. So we have a Tetris block of laser light and then a square of white light that is being sent completely through the optical path on the other side. So it hits both the fixed mirror and the moving mirror passes through the beam splitter, comes back out right up through here, and when it passes through this section here, there are two cylindrical lenses that focus a very tiny portion of that Tetris block of laser light into a tight beam. So that ends up looking a little something like this diagram right here, which I drew by hand. So you can see our Tetris block of laser light is here, and the cylindrical lenses focus tight light onto these little boxes over here where I've got TX and TY. And then you can see our white light is up in the other corner over there. And the circles all throughout here are the individual sensors that are on our sensor card right here. So you've got TX and TY in the focus laser, you've got X and Y in the broad laser, R is in the center point, and then Z is in the white light. So we have to make sure that all of these are aligned perfectly, but if we're dealing with just DC levels, things can get a little tricky. It's kind of hard to figure out exactly what's going on, but our laser light and our white light is passing through the full optical path. So if we can get the mirror moving, which it is doing now, we can now make use of the fact that the laser is going to be constructively and destructively interfering with itself. So the laser has a wavelength of like 690 something nanometers. And as we're moving the mirror, the beam splitter is going to be splitting that beam and then recombining it. And that laser is going to be moving in and out of phase with itself. And we should be able to see that in and out of phase interference as a sine wave on the oscilloscope picked up by the sensors on this card, read out of the, after it goes through a bunch of amplifiers, read out of the test points here on the bottom. And we should be able to move this thing around until we get absolutely everything aligned perfectly. Now I've got a full procedure that I got to follow here, which is not short, but this is like now getting very exciting. So let's turn this thing on and see if we can do it. This is all going to be pure voiceover because this is going to use both of my brain cells to their fullest extent. Our first step is to bolt a piece of paper to where the sensor card would normally sit. Then we'll flip the power on and get the laser powered up, and that Heaney laser seems to be getting more and more stable the more I use it, which is awesome. It's not super bright though, so I gotta flip the room lights off, and looking at the paper, we can clearly see the focused light from those cylindrical lenses. What we want to do is block everything except that focused light. So I'm going to use my buddy TechAV's business card here. Check him out at techav.net. He makes some really cool stuff. But I'm going to slide his card in between the laser light and paper, blocking everything except the focused slits of light. Once I've got it in place, I'll tape it down so it doesn't move. Then we flip the power back off, remove our little piece of paper, and loosely bolt the sensor board back into place. This is going to need a lot of adjustment, so we don't want to cinch it down just yet. Once the sensor board is plugged in, we flip the power back on, then hook our oscilloscope up to the TX and TY pins. These are the two sensors that should be right on those focused beams. Initially, I'm just looking to see if they have similar DC offsets, but this doesn't look right to me. Sure, there's a lot of noise, but no matter how much I adjust or move the board around, I can never manage to get the traces on the scope to do anything. Just to make sure I'm not going crazy or just bad at my job here, let's get the mirror moving. I'll flip the machine into mode 3 and then flip the scan switch on, which should get the mirror moving up and down, and yep, there it goes. Back over on the scope, we should be seeing a sine wave as the laser goes in and out of phase with itself, but nothing. No matter how I move the board, the sensor isn't picking up anything. Something is clearly broken here. So let's pull the sensor board back off and see if something jumps out at us. My first suspect is this filter on the back. This is supposed to block everything except the Heaney laser, but it looks pretty gnarly. It may have broken down over the years and is now blocking the laser as well. This filter isn't explicitly necessary, it just makes alignment a lot easier in the field. So after conferring with Mike, we decided to remove it and do alignment in hard mode. It's just glued in place and pops off super easy. And we can now see the teeny tiny little photodiode sensors on the board. I'll get the board bolted back onto the machine, flip the power on again, and as I move the board around, I can clearly see the DC offset going crazy. No clue what's up with the green trace here. That doesn't look super right to me, but let's soldier on. On the front panel, it's back into mode 3 and then flipping the scan switch and the mirror starts moving. Then over on the scope, that's super promising looking. A very clear sine wave is showing up. That's awesome. Now I just need to adjust it such that the amplitudes of the TX and TY sine waves are as close as possible. It's fiddly and very much so one of those things that you just gotta feel your way through, but eventually I got to this point. The waves are super jittery, and I'm not sure why. They also tend to go in and out of phase, but that is actually expected because the mirror is moving the entire length of the tube right now. If I take a single shot though, we can see the amplitudes aren't identical, but absolutely are close enough. We can push on with alignment now. I'll move the scope probes from TX and TY over to X and Y next. Then I'll also add in a third probe for R. Then I finally need to remove TechAV's business card so that all the laser light can make it to the sensors. And on the scope here, even though we can still see all that jitter and that's bothering me, if we take a single shot, that looks near perfect. X, Y, and Z should be pretty much identical looking, and they absolutely are. So let's flip the alignment switch on the front panel and see if it can grab alignment. All right, check this out. This is pretty cool here. There's a lot of jitter going on, and that's because our motor needs a little extra help going on. But look at this. The peaks, even the jitter, are all perfectly in sync. If I take a single shot here, you can see that the peaks and valleys line up perfectly. And this is X, Y, and R. So that means that the laser is striking those three sensors perfectly flat, and we don't have, it means that we're aligned. That's what that means. So we have the laser perfectly aligned now, but remember the laser is a V. We still have that block of white light. We need to align that next. You can even see that the align light on the front panel came on, but to move on to the next step, we gotta take it out of alignment by flipping the align switch off. Then I'll just slip TechAV's card into the laser path here, and with the lights off, we can see some interesting stuff. The V shape is to be expected, but look at all that spillover light. That's totally normal, but it was just a little surprising to see is all. However, our next step actually concerns this little pinpoint of white light. This is slightly misaligned, and we gotta get it perfectly hitting the proper sensor. And that sensor is visible on the Z pin of the sensor board on the back. The white light is emitted from this little lamp up here, and if I block the light with TechAV's card, over on the scope we can see the DC offset jump around. So the light is actually very close to being aligned. Some of it is actually striking the sensor, but not enough. Since the sensor board is now properly aligned, to change the position of the white light, we actually have to adjust this little prism here that slices out the corner of the laser light in the first place. It's adjustable via these 4 little screws in a push-pull arrangement, and this was the only part of the process that really tested my patience. It took me 45 minutes to get that little dot of light to move less than a millimeter. But ultimately I got there, and I'm seeing about a 0.6 volt change between blocking the light and letting it shine, which is pretty good. And now we've hit the final step in the process, but the fact that it's a new day and I'm wearing a completely different t-shirt should tell you that like a typical Usagi Electric video, things have gone horribly sideways. At this point, what we're trying to do is lock down the ZPD detection. So ZPD stands for zero path difference. This is the point at which the fixed mirror and the moving mirror are equidistant from the beam splitter, which means that every little bit of light that passes through the optical path is going to be constructively interfering. And since we have a little bit of white light passing through that optical path that is hitting the Z sensor on this board, we're essentially doing spectroscopy. So if we look at that Z sensor, we should see an interferogram, and we are. If we look at the yellow line here on the scope, that interferogram looks exactly like we're expecting. This big peak is the point at which every wavelength passing through the optical path is constructively interfering, and then as the mirror moves away, we get more and more destructive interference, so our squiggles die off and we go back down into essentially nothing on the far right here. And you can see that the green trace is our op-amp chain that is detecting this big peak. And we need to adjust this so it detects the big peak correctly, but here's where everything went sideways. While this looks perfect, if I hit run here, and I've just got the scope set in normal mode, you're gonna see that the green trace starts popping off. And that reason is that there is noise showing up on the Z signal, and that noise is loud enough, the op-amp chain is triggering. And the computer thinks that there's multiple ZPDs throughout the entire distance of the mirror, and everything's getting very confused. So where is this noise coming from? And that's the million-dollar question. I spent hours on the phone with Mike yesterday, hours on the phone with Mike today, and the answer is that we don't know yet. This is very weird. Mike has never seen any other spectrometer do this exact problem, so we're in kind of uncharted territory here. We have two working theories at the moment. The first is that the motor up here could be just enough out of spec that it's causing minor vibrations to get transmitted to the mirror, and we're seeing those minor vibrations get picked up by the sensor down here. The other theory is that the op-amp chain on this board here has a failing part that is injecting noise into the system. Now I can hear all of you guys hammering away on your keyboard furiously saying that it's the Meanwell power supply that I've got bolted to the bottom, but it's not. This board has its own separate power supply and its own separate 0-volt return that's completely different than that 5-volt Meanwell that's up there. And if it was the high frequency noise from that Meanwell, we would expect it to be rhythmic. We'd expect it to have a pattern, and this doesn't have a pattern. So something is unhealthy somewhere. And in the next episode, we're gonna try and hunt that down, because that's the only thing that's keeping us from having essentially a fully functional spectrometer. We are so close, but this failure is so interesting. Where's the noise coming from? This is gonna be a fun journey to figure out. So we got a phenomenal amount done. This machine is 99% of the way there, and we're gonna get it all the way there in the next episode. So I wanna thank you all so much for hanging out with me today, and I hope to see you in the next one.